Washington Journal continues.
I want to show for you, this is John Taylor on your screen, who is the president and CEO of the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, here to talk about foreclosure prevention measures. Put some statistics, before we start talking here, let's put some statistics up on the screen. Foreclosure rates for January 2010, 315,716 properties foreclosed, 15% above the January 2009 levels. California, Florida, and Arizona account for about 44% of the national total for January. And then looking at home affordable modification program, what the Congress and the Obama administration put forth. In January 2010, 1 million homeowners have received temporary loan modifications. 116,000, or about 11%, received permanent loan modifications. The goal was 3 to 4 million loan modifications. Mr. Taylor, what needs to happen next in order for the Obama administration and Congress to reach that goal?
Well, the most important thing is they need to remove the voluntary nature of participation by the banks to modify these loans, meaning the program they have, the program the Bush administration had, is to get banks and services to voluntarily participate in the government's programs to modify loans. And unfortunately, you're seeing low levels of participation. You showed the figures with 300,000 foreclosures a month. That used to be what it was in a year. It's now a month we're losing as many homes to foreclosure as we used to lose in a year. So it's not working. Of the modifications they are making, only 1 out of 10 or 90% are failing and going back into foreclosure or back into default. So they've got to get serious and take the gloves off and really say, look, no more voluntary participation. You've got to work with us to stop these foreclosures because it continues to drive down the economy, drive down property values of everybody in this country, and we've got to stop this crisis.
The New York Times this morning, on Sunday morning, had a piece, "Program will pay homeowners to sell at a loss." This new approach is that they're going to pay some homeowners to leave, and it'll allow homeowners to sell for less than they owe and will give them a little cash to speed them on their way. How will this work?
Well, I think the government is continuing to nibble at the edges of this problem. What they're trying to do is entice homeowners to sell their home for less money than the mortgage, and give them a small fee, $1,500, to do that. The bank would have to take a loss on that, and then somebody else would buy this house at a significantly reduced price. And I think, as far as if someone's unemployed and they have no options, that might be the option for them. But for most homeowners, where their property values have simply crashed because of the economy and because of the malfeasant lending practices that drove this economy down, it would be better if they would reduce, if they're going to reduce the mortgage, do it for the folks who are still in the homes and who are still working, so that we're not artificially actually pushing down property values by forcing a short sale that actually on the books gets recorded as a sale and a reduction in the value of a house. Let's reduce it enough for people to want to remain in their homes and continue to remain in their homes and continue to watch the economy hopefully improve, and then property values will start to go up. But I don't think short sales are the answer by any stretch.
Do you think that banks will participate in a short sale?
I do. I think it'll be in their interest to do short sales under certain circumstances, particularly people who have lost their job and have no income. This might be the only avenue available to them.
What about fraud, though, in a short sale situation? Is it easy?
I do think a short sale lends itself to fraud, to folks coming in who are looking to just reduce their mortgage and sell it cheaply to a friend, and then maybe it gets sold back. I mean, but I think there are ways to make sure that documentation that shows really the borrower is in a stressed situation, that they've tried everything, they've depleted their savings, they've lost their income. There's ways of really verifying whether it's an honest short sale, an honest borrower who needs to get rid of their property through a short sale.
What impact would a short sale have on a person's credit rating?
Well, under the President's program, I think what they're trying to do is by agreement with the bank that it wouldn't have a negative impact. So there wouldn't be a reporting to the agency. It would be treated as if the house was just sold for almost fair market value. So theoretically, it wouldn't hurt the credit score.
So, Mr. Taylor, you said you're not. You sound skeptical. You don't think the short sale is the way to go. You want the administration to be working more closely with those who want to stay in their home. Specifically, how should the administration go about doing that?
Well, very specifically, the same thing what we said to Secretary Paulson and now Secretary Geithner is they need to go in and purchase these loans. The best thing to do is go in and no longer leave it to the option of the banks or the investment companies or the services, or for that matter, Fannie and Freddie, the government-sponsored agencies, to sort of decide to do something or not do something. But go in and just take these loans out, and you get them at a reduced value because they're no longer worth what they were. And then just force the modification, the refinancing of these loans into what should have been loans that were sustainable and responsible loans in the first place. At least then we're no longer waiting for this voluntary participation from these lenders and services. You're going in and you're making sure that as many of these loans as possible, those folks who are still working can still afford to pay on their mortgage, but got perhaps loans that are just, that have morphed into these predatory, unsavory, too expensive loans, that you can immediately take all those off the table by refinancing those loans. The other piece of it is that for folks who are looking at their home and they're saying, gee, my home is nowhere near the value of what I'm paying on my mortgage. I guess I should just get out from under this mortgage, leave this house. It doesn't make any sense. That's a big problem for the government. But there, too, going in and taking these mortgages away from the banks using either eminent domain, they use eminent domain all the time to take people's homes for highways and other purposes. Why not use eminent domain for the purpose of keeping people in their homes? So take these mortgages, refinance them, reduce the amount of that mortgage to be more in line with what the appraised value is, perhaps still above the appraised value, but give the borrower more incentive to stay in that home and continue to pay on their mortgage.
We're talking with John Taylor, the President and CEO of National Community Reinvestment Coalition, about foreclosure prevention measures. We have a tweet here from one of our viewers at twitter.com CSPAN-WJ saying this: they fixed nothing. It will get much worse. You have not seen nothing yet. The foreclosures will be up to 40% from last year. Mr. Taylor?
Yeah, the statistics are not good. I wouldn't say they haven't fixed anything. They've obviously helped some people, but if we were grading both administrations, both the Bush and the Obama administrations, for what they've done, the Bush administration would have got an F, and the Obama administration would have gotten a D. The numbers are continuing to escalate. As you showed at the beginning of the program, 300,000 foreclosures in January, up 15% from last year. 300,000 foreclosures is what we used to get in a year several years ago. So and what we're looking at now, depending on whose statistics you want to believe, but there's at least another 5 to 7 million more potential foreclosures. And if we're ever going to turn this economy around, if we're ever going to get back on track to creating jobs and having a sustainable economy, we've got to stop the foreclosures. The foreclosures of what have gotten us here. They've depressed property values, reduced tax income for cities and states and towns. They've killed the building industry. Who's going to be building houses when we have a huge inventory of empty houses? All the contractors and all the associated industries that relate to home building, they're all on the ropes. We've got to stop the foreclosures, and we're looking at too many on the horizon because of the kind of loans that were put out there that were allowed to be made in the early part of this decade.
First phone call here from Mr. Taylor, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Pat, on the Democratic line. Good morning.
Good morning. My partner and I sold off all of our income properties and paid off our home and have no mortgage left. And I have to tell you, we would be lucky if we broke even in the sale of our house. And Pittsburgh, by the way, is an extraordinarily stable market. And when I look at everything that's going on, particularly like on Wall Street, with Wall Street bankers walking away with $140 billion of stolen money, of our tax derived from our tax dollars, and China, for God's sakes, is investing less in the military-industrial complex than we are. They're investing 1.6. We're investing 4. So how do you think that this train is going to continue going on when you have an endemic crisis across, and this is literally across the board? There is absolutely no way in hell that this situation, the way the United States is ignoring its people and not addressing very serious across-the-board endemic issues, and it is just not a sustainable situation.
John Taylor.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the caller is absolutely correct, and I think he raises the broader issue that all Americans ought to be concerned with, is we have a Congress that, you know, their first job is to get reelected. Most people would think, well, they sit here and they're very mindful and thoughtful about what to do to solve the nation's problems, but you know, when you look at the legislation that didn't get passed, and the you know, you just had a very good show on health care. It's the same thing with consumer protections for consumers in the financial services sector. We just don't have the kind of thoughtful, committed Congress that is going to do fundamental things to make sure the interests of consumers come first, and we learned, by the way, from this financial crisis, because we didn't have consumer protections in place, you had unscrupulous lenders, not all of them, but a lot of them, who were able to do the kinds of lending that really toppled this nation economically. And we still, to this day, we don't have a consumer finance protection agency. We don't have a national federal law that outlaws the predatory lending. We got a credit card bill that basically the industry has already moved, before it took effect just a week ago, to make changes to subvert and go around that credit card bill. And the biggest change in the bill is now that credit cards companies have to inform you before they are going to stick it to you. And so we have a Congress, unfortunately, and you know, that isn't willing to be honest and open with the people and say, look, here's what it costs to rebuild our infrastructure for the country. Here's what we need to do to make sure we don't have these kind of predatory lending practices. Here's what we need to do to have adequate and quality health care for all Americans. Here's what we need to do in education. Instead, it's, okay, so what do I need to say to the people that's going to get them to think, oh yes, I'm looking out for them, and so I should vote for them in the next election. So they get up and they tell you, I'm for cutting taxes, and I think you know, Ronald Reagan with his, you know, the 8 worst words in the English language is, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Can you imagine saying, the leader of the government saying, I'm from the government and I'm here to help, being a bad thing? A long way from John Kennedy, who said, ask not what you can do for what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. We've got to believe in this country again, and we've got to elect people who are going to Congress to be leaders, not just to get a job and to get reelected. And so people have to really ask tough questions and really hold people accountable. And I think this caller is right. If we don't change this situation, if we don't create jobs, if we don't rein in the financial services sector, if we don't get the financial services sector to start lending to small businesses and individuals and do it responsibly, I think we're going to be in for a long, difficult period. And right now we got 5 million foreclosures that we should just take care of right away. We should start nibbling at the edges, go in and get these loans and get those loans modified, at least take care of that problem, and then deal with and continue to deal with all the other challenges that we have ahead of us.
Mr. Taylor, here is an email from one of our viewers. Why is it that you think property should keep a value that is not supported by the market? Does this not artificially raise property taxes on all that have paid for their property? This is stealing to make artificial value.
Right. Well, that's if you believe that the property values are going down just through natural market forces. The problem is, yes, we have a free market, but we had a free market that was free to cajole and free to cheat and free to commit fraud and free to do all the things that it did. And that's really what undermined the economy and is driving property values down. Most Americans, 9 out of 10, continue to pay on their mortgages, continuing to be good citizens, continuing to work, and yet their property values are going down. Is that really the free market, or is that really the malfeasant, fraudulent market that was are allowed to prosper in the early part of this decade and issue the kinds of loans that were unsustainable or so expensive with hidden fees and terms and conditions that it really drove this market into the doldrums? So I'm all for a free market, but remember, Adam Smith himself, the god of the free market, who many people love to cite, he felt that a free market was the most important thing for a democracy, but he also felt that there needed to be a rule of law that ensured fairness and integrity in that free market. That's the part that kind of got thrown out the window with Senator Graham and successive Congresses, where they weren't willing to hold the banks accountable. The Federal Reserve, which had the ability to really rein in these practices, they all took a walk, and they left consumers at their peril and to the abuses that the industry created in order to reap great profits, regardless of the borrower's ability to pay, regardless of terms and conditions. So,
Mr. Taylor, do you have any numbers about the impact of a neighbor who's a neighbor who has a house that he's paying for, is paying the mortgage and fiscally okay,
yeah,
next to a neighbor who could either foreclose or get his loan modified or do a short sale and sell his property for less than it's worth? What's the impact on that neighbor's house?
Well, if your next door neighbor goes into foreclosure, your house is going to drop in value on average. Depends on each region of the country, but you're probably looking at about $7,000. When multiple homes in your neighborhood go down, then you have multiple impacts on your house. So nationwide, on average, we're looking at somewhere between 35 to 40% of value has been lost in many areas of the country. In other areas, 20, 35%, but significant property reductions without that homeowner really having done anything, themselves to lessen their value. So it's pretty significant.
Framingham, Massachusetts. John on the Republican line. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. How are you?
Morning, sir. Go ahead.
Okay. You're talking to someone who had to put 50% down in 1986 to buy his home. Now, I don't know what the Banking Modernization Act did. I don't know what the Community Reinvestment Act did. All I know is this. We had something called mortgage-backed securities, and it seemed like it didn't matter if the person buying the home was worthless. It didn't make any difference if they lied on their loan, as long as they could get the material to bring to Wall Street to feed this appetite for, I have no idea what these investments were going to be. But if you ask me, they were taking them into the mainstream market and mixing them. It was like mixing sawdust with hamburger. This is a crime to me, and I don't see anything being done. I mean, it's like organized crime.
Mr. Taylor, any thoughts?
Yeah, listen, a Republican from Massachusetts, he probably voted for Scott Brown. Look, you're absolutely right. And I hate to say it, but, we tried. I mean, this guy really nailed it on the head, this Republican caller. We tried our darndest to get successive administrations, but in particular, the Republicans, when they controlled the Senate, and Phil Gramm was chairman of the Senate Banking Committee, to try to pass legislation that would prohibit these kind of practices. The call is right. This was a Ponzi scheme on the highest level. You had investment bankers, many of them very young guys, 3-4 years out of MBA school, whose salary and bonuses depended upon them just moving money in and out of these mortgage-backed securities or moving investors' money into these securities. And they got really $10, $15 million a year in bonuses just by moving these funds. Well, once you kind of exhausted the responsible loans that were available, where do you put these funds? If there isn't enough mortgages in the mortgage-backed securities. So what Wall Street did is they said to the brokers and the lenders, look, make any loans you want, any terms and conditions, we'll buy them. And then they went to the rating agencies and they said, look, because I don't know if you know this, but investment banks, the very folks who are are making a fee on moving this money into these mortgage-backed securities, they actually pay the fee of the rating agencies. So they go to the rating agencies and they say, look, rate these mortgage-backed securities, rate these mortgages, and be sure to rate them good, because we want people to invest in them, so we want AAA ratings. And, that's literally what happened. In fact, people would be surprised to learn that these high-cost loans, the ones that were most predatory, 80% of them had AAA ratings. So you're a pension fund from California, or from, a dental pension fund from France, or a Chinese government. You're buying these securities looking at a AAA rating thinking, oh, these are terrific. But the underlying premise for these loans, low documentation, nothing or little down, piggyback loans, yield spread premiums, prepayment penalties, all these terms and conditions which made these loans unsustainable. But the problem was the broker or the lender got their fee up front, and then it got securitized on Wall Street, so they were out of it. And as long as that borrower paid for 3 months, that broker or lender got their fee. The appraiser got their fee. So they appraised it at, being influenced by the financial institutions, they appraised it at what was needed, it needed to be appraised at. They were highly influenced. The rating agencies got their fee, and then the investment banks got their super fee. The ones who were really being taken advantage, and in the end really stuck it to them, is to investors and to the homeowners who thought they were getting a loan that was sustainable because they wouldn't think anybody would make a loan to them that wasn't sustainable. The investors saw the AAA rating and assumed that they were getting a good investment. But really in the middle was a great Ponzi scheme, and the gentleman's right. The Republican from Massachusetts is right. We need to go after these folks, and we need to put some people in jail, not just bail them out, which is what's happened.
John Taylor is the president and CEO of the National Community Reinvestment Coalition. Your group is coming to Washington later this week for your annual conference. What will you be doing? Are you meeting with members of Congress, the Obama administration?
Right. So we have about 600 organizations, and they're community development organizations, they're people who build affordable housing, they're civil rights groups, they're local cities and towns, anybody who's trying to find a way to build wealth in their communities and make sure that the financial services sector addresses the building of wealth. Because frankly, this is not just a government thing. In fact, if we don't find a way to get responsible lending and banks back into a lot of these neighborhoods that are now distressed, we're not going to have much hope in America of reclaiming these communities. So that's what we do. We have an annual conference every year, lasts 4 days. All sorts of, very smart people come and train a lot of people on what's going on, the kind of conversation we're having today, but in much more depth. It's from March 11th to the 14th. It's on our website, ncrc.org. So if people are interested, please register and come. But we'll be all over Capitol Hill. We'll be meeting with different members of the administration, trying to get them to appreciate that we've got to stop the foreclosures. We've got to pass laws. In particular, this Consumer Finance Protection Agency. People don't realize that we have, we still do not have in place a system of protection that's going to make sure that consumers never get abused and never have to run through this gauntlet of unsafe and usurious kind of lending practices again. I mean, God, if we look at what's happened in this country because of this malfeasant lending, if we aren't willing to pass a law now that in the same way we protect banks using the Federal Reserve and the other agencies and make sure that they're safe and sound and stable, and that we have monetary policy that looks out for the interests of the nation as a whole, we need to make sure that the average taxpayer does not need to worry when they walk into a financial institution that loan officer is a step removed from being a loan shark. And that just ought to be the law of the land, but there's been such confusion about what all this is. Every civilized nation has consumer protections that make sure that they do not allow for these kind of predatory lending practices. So that's one of the important things that really needs to happen. And unfortunately, this Congress, again, more concerned with being reelected than really looking out for the interest, I think, of the average person. People have got to get active on this. I mean, think of it. What is wrong with the notion of having an agency that makes sure that there isn't malfeasant lending practices? There's nothing wrong with that.
Real
In
quickly,
fact, it's a necessity.
Real quickly, Mr. Taylor, the talk is to put this Consumer Protection Agency within the Federal Reserve. You're opposed to that? Why?
Well, I mean, the Federal Reserve has, through Chairman Bernanke, has all but admitted they really, I shouldn't say all but, has admitted they really dropped the ball on enforcing whatever laws they had on the books and protecting consumers to begin with. You know, Congress gave them, in 1994, gave the Federal Reserve the right, the responsibility for issuing rules about unfair and deceptive lending practices. 94, they did not pass the rules that would prohibit a lot of these malfeasant lending practices until, get this, July of 2008, long after, you know, the horse had escaped the barn. It was, you know, the barn had fallen down, the hay had rotted. I mean, they were so late in responding and trying to protect consumers. And then I could go on about, you know, the bailout of AIG and allowing mergers of Bank of America and Countrywide and Wachovia and Wells and World Savings and all these mergers without having conditions that ensured that the loans that were malfeasant got modified, putting literally trillions of dollars into the market, into Wall Street and others, bailing them out without making sure that the kind of malfeasant and bad loans that were made, that those things got cleaned up. And so the leverage that they should have had, could have had, both under the Bush administration and now under this administration, you know, was non-existent. To put it at the Fed is to put it in an agency who has historically and expressly had consumers as a secondary thought. I served in the Federal Reserve's Consumer Advisory Council. They refer to banks as their clients, not taxpayers, not you and I, not consumers. They refer to banks as their clients. That's who they look out for, and that's who they should look out for. They should make sure that those banks are not operating unsafely, unsoundly. But you need an agency who looks out for consumers to manage a consumer protection agency. You do not need the Federal Reserve. They're the last place, and historically they've shown they're not interested in any way.
Mr. Taylor, we have several people lining up to talk to you, so we'll go to a tweet first and then go to our phone calls. Why are we not holding the borrower or buyer responsible for being educated and buying property that they knew they couldn't afford?
Well, you know, that's a very good question because there's a couple assumptions in there. We actually have more financial literacy programs in this country, and during this period of the worst malfeasant lending, we actually had more financial literacy programs than ever in our history. And yet all this bad lending occurred. It wasn't that borrowers were ignorant. It was that lenders were allowed to do things they would never have done 10 years ago because the agencies would have stopped it. They would have seen it as unsafe or unsound or predatory. They would have done something about it. So this notion that borrowers went in and they would just, you know, they should have known better, perhaps that's okay to say, but you know, we're always going to have folks who are not as educated or you know, are first-time home buyers. They don't have someone in their family who had a mortgage who can guide them. We just need to make sure on the side of the equation where loans are being issued that those folks are not allowed to practice unsavory, unsound, unsafe, or predatory lending practices.
All right. Fond du Lake, Wisconsin. Yeah. Mike on the independent line. Go ahead.
Yeah, good morning, John. There, you explained a lot of stuff that I didn't realize before, but what I still don't understand is the money, the bailout money. Where did that go? And if it was because of bad mortgages, didn't they pay for the bad mortgages when they bailed them out? I'll take.
Right. No, that's a good question. Unfortunately, what the hook wasn't, here, we'll give you this money, now deal with these mortgages. That's more of the hook now under this administration, but it wasn't when we first created this bailout program under Bush and Paulson. The money really was to stabilize the financial services sector. And I agree that we had to step in. I mean, there are people who say, well, let them fail. Let Citi go down, let Wells go down, let these other banks go down. I think if that occurred, we wouldn't be going through what people now call the Great Recession. We'd really be in a depression at this point, and there'd be even less confidence in investing in America if like what happened with Lehman Brothers. We let that fall, and I think hindsight's always 20/20. But I think if the folks, in the Bush administration who made that decision to let Lehman Brothers fall, if they were to make it again, I think they'd think twice about that, because it began a domino effect, I think, of lost investments in America. That fortunately, by stabilizing the banks and preventing some of them from failing, told people, no, we're not. Your investments are still safe, and America is still in a strong economy, and this is a good place to invest. But there wasn't any connection to bailing out the mortgages. Rather, it was just to bail out the banks to keep enough capital in those institutions so they could survive long enough for the economy to turn around. And we're beginning to see the results of that. It was a smart move, but it didn't deal with the foreclosure crisis. The caller's right.
Anne in Baltimore on the Democratic line.
Hi, good morning.
Morning.
Anytime I hear, all this, it just gets me so angry. And, no one is ever going to go to jail. But I think, even more so public trust, because I was just wondering what your take was on people that can actually make payments. I mean, this is our first home. We can afford it. But a lot of people that can afford their mortgages are walking away because they have underwater mortgages. We owe our mortgage, our home is worth $100,000 less than what we bought it, and we can make the payments, but everyone gets away with doing wrong things. And for the first time in my life, I actually feel like doing that too, because no one seems to care about what goes on with regular folks that are really trying. I mean, we don't have we didn't have a predatory loan. We both have jobs. We can make the payments, but what's the point? And, I just think there's going to be a bigger trend of people actually just walking away even though they can afford it. And I was just wondering what your thoughts were. Thank you.
Well, I think the call is right. I think there are people who can pay who would be looking at walking away. I'd be careful of that because it will impact your credit score. But, those are the borrowers who ought to be talking to their institutions about whether or not the mortgage really is too high and whether or not the bank is willing to refinance that mortgage at a lesser rate so that there's more incentive for that borrower to stay in the home. I would really recommend that this person continue to pay on their mortgage. I would also recommend that for those who, if you can find it, if your bank is willing to work with you to get your mortgage reduced some, that it really is in their interest and your interest, because they don't want to have to try to sell this home in a market, a down market, where the bank is going to lose more than if they just reduce that mortgage sum, maybe obviously not to the current appraised value, but at least to an amount above the appraised value that says to the caller who just called from Baltimore, yeah, it's worth us to stay in this house and continue to pay in this mortgage because the property value eventually will rise to the amount that it's currently above the appraised value, and then we can see on the horizon that it even goes beyond it, so that eventually they'll see the equity in their home and they'll see the reason to stay in that. But it's a real concern. I mean, she raises a very good point. I don't think that there are a lot of, the average person who has a mortgage is not sitting there sort of calculating, excuse me, my mortgage is too much given the value of my house, I should just walk away from it. I think they're really struggling with how to pay their monthly amount of their mortgage, and that's the real major problem for most people. And then also unemployment, excuse me, rising unemployment is really driving a lot of people into perilous situations where they really are forced to either belly up on their mortgage or ideally work with the bank to get the homes sold. Citibank has a new program, which I hope a lot of the other lenders follow, which allows for a six-month period in which the borrower can pay a percentage of their unemployment insurance towards their mortgage while they prepare for the sale of the house, rather than having that borrower immediately go into foreclosure. I mean, there are things that other lenders are doing where they're trying to work with homeowners, ideally to keep them in the house, ideally to have as little pain and suffering for all involved by having the homeowner move out and having a sale. So there's a lot of interest in trying to work together. The government would be most helpful here to force the lenders and the consumers to the table to do this. One of the things that we haven't mentioned on the program is, there was a lot of debate about bankruptcy reform. You can protect your yacht, you can protect your summer home, your ski chalet, you can protect all these other assets in bankruptcy, but ironically, even though for most of the history you could, Congress took this away several decades back, but you can't protect your home in bankruptcy. If this protection existed, you'd really force everybody to table to really renegotiate things to a fairer, more responsible kind of level, where the borrower is still on the hook, everybody's still paying, but at least it narrows the kind of deficit that the borrower is suffering from and keeps them in their home and stops the foreclosures.
Carol on the Republican line in Auburn, Massachusetts. Thanks for waiting, Carol. Go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you. And I have to first of all tell you that I am really irate over this whole situation. Mr. Taylor uses the word malfeasance so many times this morning, it's like a new word in the dictionary. He seems to forget that there was a lot of talk about when the Reinvestment Act came through, that Clinton was told, get inventive, use whatever programs you can to get these loans through. And he also forgets about the redlining and all the threats that were made to the bank. He also hasn't brought up the idea that foreclosures take a long time to get through. So these people are living in homes, rent-free, no taxes, not paying utilities at the expense of everyone else that is paying their mortgages. He hasn't mentioned the fact that there are people who are owner invested in multiple dwellings, not second mortgages, not illegals who are involved in getting this. And also, I'd like him to explain why these people have had adjustments in their mortgages, why they're getting bonuses and tax credits for paying their loan on time after it has been adjusted. And I thank you, and I'm sorry that I'm upset about this, but this is a ripoff to every American and young couple that are paying their mortgages on time and being responsible. Thank you.
Mr. Taylor.
Yeah, I mean, she brings up a lot of things. I'll try to cover all of them. But I understand the outrage, but her outrage is pointed in the wrong direction. She should be outraged that these kinds of loans were allowed to be made in the first place, that there should have been a government agency stepping in and saying, look, you can't make those kind of loans. Those are unsustainable, they're predatory, and in 6 months, in a year, in 2 years, these borrowers won't be able to afford those loans. That's what happened. And you know, one of the things of conservatives in this country is what they like to say is, oh, well, this is really the government pushing people into homeownership, or this was, the caller mentioned earlier, the Community Reinvestment Act. See, the problem with that is that there's just no factual support for that. But what you do is you point your finger at something else, and then you say, oh, it was the fault of that law. So let me give you an example that this lady just said, and I'm sure she read this or heard this somewhere. I'm sure she's a well-intended person. But look, the Community Reinvestment Act was a simple law that indeed outlawed redlining back in the 70s, but it basically said banks have an affirmative obligation to loan to working-class blue-collar people, not just to the wealthy. So at one time, the banks would rather make loans only to millionaires rather than people working their way up the economic ladder. But the law also said that it had to be done safely and soundly. It's very specific in the law, not the regulation. So, you know, when you look at the kinds of loans that have gone into foreclosures, these malfeasant loans, the Federal Reserve, hardly a bastion of liberal thought, did a study and found that nearly less than 6% of all these bad loans came from banks that were regulated by this Reinvestment Act that she mentioned. These bad loans came from independent mortgage companies, from brokers, and from a lot of other folks who were not overseen by the Community Reinvestment Act. So Ameriquest, New Century, Option One, Countrywide, they had no obligation under the Community Reinvestment Act. So they were free to do what they wanted, and the Federal Trade Commission, which had all of 2 people to manage the entire mortgage division, so it really had no capacity to even look at this, allowed these practices to continue. And then with Wall Street paying out big fees and incentivizing these brokers, these independent mortgage companies, to do all these loans, this is what happened. So nobody, not Obama, not Bush, wanted anybody to get into a home that was unsustainable. That doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help the economy. It doesn't help the homeowner. They lose whatever deposit they put down. They lose their credit score. So you should be angry. I mean, people should be held accountable, but do not blame the people who walked into a loan office thinking they were getting us a sustainable loan. All these people who walked in, and believe me, we counsel a lot. We talk to these people. You'd be surprised how many of them are white and how many of them are educated, who were told, look, why are you buying this small house? You should buy this big house. We can make a loan to you. Oh, I don't know if I can afford that. Of course you can afford that. This is how you're going to build wealth quicker. You're going to build more equity. Look, I can get you this loan. Little did the borrower realize that that person across the table making that loan didn't give a hoot about whether you ever paid that loan back. They gave a hoot at the size of your loan, whether they could talk you into more usurious terms and conditions with longer prepayment penalties and yield spread premiums. They actually got a bigger fee if they talked you into those terms and conditions, and a bigger fee if they talked you into a larger loan. So the brokers and lenders were incentivized to do the kind of practices that really were non-sustainable. And once they made that loan, they sold it to Wall Street and it was gone. So look, nobody was sitting in government hoping that the industry was going to be doing the kinds of loans that were unsustainable. She may not like the word malfeasance. I'll use another word: bad lenders, bad brokers, bad Wall Street. I mean, whatever word, whatever you want to call it, it was unsustainable, unfair, and deceptive lending practices that were allowed to permeate our lending landscape with little or no oversight by the federal government. That's what happened. That's who she really should be angry at.
C. Ross in Albany, New York, Mr. Taylor writes, why is no one talking about the effect of energy prices on the economy and how much they affect the people trying to keep up with their monthly expenses like mortgages and food? On top of that, the USA Today this morning has a front page story: gas back up to $3 a gallon this spring, but the economy could keep it from going a little higher. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think these things are all connected. Energy costs, health care, education, rebuilding our highways and bridges, and job creation. The problem is they're also all connected to a Congress who, as you may not like my language, so let me use the language of a senator from Illinois, Senator Durbin. This is the best Congress that money can buy. Forget whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent. The Tea Party folks are very upset with the current administration, and the irony is that for 95% of Americans, they actually get a tax reduction. But what they're not getting is a healthy economy, health care, quality education, roads and bridges that are safe and sound. They're not getting a financial services sector that's lending, that's treating them fairly, and so much more. The environment, the energy costs, these are things that we ought to be electing people who go to Washington and they're the best and the brightest, and they really look out for our interests. They look out to try to make sure that we pass laws, rules, and regulations that, yes, that make business continue the free market and make sure that that the regulations don't have a disparate impact in terms of requiring too much time and energy to adhere to, but ensure that but those regulations ensure that things are being done fairly, democratically, equitably. So we need laws that address creating more sustainable energy so that we spend less at the pump. We need laws that make sure that people aren't finding out once people who love their insurance plan aren't finding out once they get really sick just how bad it is, or that insurance companies continue to raise costs. Our whole food supply system, this caller has set me in a different direction, but let me just say, why are we allowing the kind of, we have obesity and difficulties in this country with the health of our nation, where we don't have our Congress really standing up saying, look, we should make it clear to people, not just on a label, but really lead this nation to understand healthy eating, exercise, quality education, all these things. We're 24th in the world now in terms of our high school educations. I mean, this is ridiculous that all these other nations are passing us. We're seeing the quality of so much of the things going down here, and people are so worried about the future and about jobs. We're having this so-called recovery where it's not the middle class that's recovering, it's really Wall Street and the very wealthy. I mean, you know, when are people going to smarten up and really start to really listen closely to what people who are running for higher office in the state or in Congress, and really elect people who are looking out for the average person, not just the large corporation.
John Taylor, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.